Ellie. It is so good to be back at Rotary. I come back and see many, many familiar faces from when I was a member of this club back in the 90s, and then see how you've rejuvenated the club and brought in lots of new faces, and that is wonderful to see. I became a member through Bill Meaner, who was a wonderful friend, a Korean War veteran, and fellow elder at Covenant Presbyterian, and it was just at the time, as Ellie said, when we were running and gunning, and we had just bought Bank of America, and my job called me to go to San Francisco about every other week, and so I could not maintain the attendance requirements here, so I couldn't keep my membership, but I'm grateful to be back. I remember that year that Fred Lowrance was your president, and I remember how well suited he seemed up here, sort of like John, and no surprise that he went on to be a minister himself. He seemed cut out for it. And Ellie, I think your humor might have been lost on some of the crowd, because they probably don't quite know how much we celebrated when we were. Ellie and I were always on that sort of small team that would be parachuted in behind the lines right before a merger would be announced. And so we would work like dogs for about 3 solid days getting everything ready for the announcement and the investor relations and the press. And then we would always go out the night after and enjoy ourselves. So I might have lost Ellie's respect somewhere in there in terms of him thinking I might be a man of God. I wanted to say thanks to John Gallus for asking me to be here, and it was his idea that I try and address a few thoughts to the subject of race. It was so appropriate. I had the pleasure of being here a couple of weeks ago when you had that young dynamic speaker from Greenville, South Carolina, who stood up here in a sort of period, well, over there in the other room, in sort of a period suit, and gave that stirring word-for-word rendition of King's "I Had a Dream" speech. It was so memorable. Dr. King's speech provides an important touchstone for us as a community and as a nation, and I've become grateful that it seems about this time of year, with King's birthday in January and then in Black History Month each February, one way or another, it seems we have the opportunity to review that speech. As a former speechwriter, I've admired that speech as a standard of excellence for both its flourishing language but also its clear convictions. I went back and looked at it after that young man spoke, and I drew out 4 quotes that might summarize it at risk of not doing it justice. King said, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal." King said, "Now is the time for us to rise from the dark and desolate valley of segregation to the sunlit path of racial justice." King said, "Now is the time to lift our nation from the quicksand of racial injustice to the solid rock of brotherhood." And as a champion of nonviolence, in that speech, he also reminded his followers, quote, that in the process of gaining our rightful place, we must not be guilty of wrongful deeds. As I listened 2 weeks ago to that young man, perhaps like some of you, I couldn't help but wonder about where we stand as a nation, even as a city, relative to some of the goals that King set out in that speech in the nation's capital that day. And I also found myself wondering, and I even asked the speaker what he thought King might say to us today. Well, to be sure, I'm no King scholar. Many of you probably know a lot more about him. I've read a fair amount of that about him. My father knew him a little bit and interviewed him in covering the civil rights era for the Atlanta papers and several national publications. So in all those ways, I suppose my interest in those questions about what King might say come honestly. And before I try to speculate about what King might say to us, I have to quickly acknowledge that I have real blinders. As a white, heterosexual, well-educated male with prematurely gray hair, I hit the jackpot in terms, thanks for laughing on that one. I hit the jackpot in terms of my place in society, at least for today. I am awarded immediate status and authority in many situations before I ever open my mouth, or the merit of my thoughts are tested. But as a pastor who reads the same prophets and the gospel as Dr. King, I share his hope that our society might indeed one day measure up to the kingdom of God that is lifted up in Scripture, a place where, as King was fond of saying from the prophets, where justice rolls down like thunder and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. That much, at least in abstract, is something that we should all be able to agree on. So given my blinders about some of this, wondering about those questions, I asked my friend Willie Ratchford what he thought King might say to us today. Many of you know Willie, I'm sure. He is the executive director of the Charlotte Community Relations Council. He has been working in the space of racial reconciliation in Charlotte for 30 plus years. So when I asked him this question of what King might say, Willie didn't hesitate to answer. He said he thought Dr. King would be profoundly proud and profoundly disappointed at the same time. He would be proud that America has elected a black president, but disappointed that that has become such a polarizing development in our American narrative. He said Dr. King would be proud that black athletes and entertainers are making millions, but profoundly disappointed at how some of them denigrate their race and with inappropriate and degrading behaviors. As for Charlotte, Dr. King might be proud that we've elected 3 black mayors in 22 years. Willie said Dr. King would be disappointed that too many young black males fail to understand the importance of education, and that the teenage pregnancy rate remains far too high. In North Carolina, the site of so many key moments in the civil rights era, we might also guess that Dr. King would be pleased with the development of a solid black middle class and professional class, but he would also be likely gravely worried about some of the recent voter access restrictions that have been legislated for minority populations. Willie rightly pointed out that Dr. King would be saddened that income inequality in America has come full circle, particularly down the lines of race. Perhaps some of you saw the study of wealth inequality last year from Brandeis University. It found that the wealth gap between blacks and whites has nearly tripled over the last 25 years, due largely to inequality, home ownership, income, education, and inheritance. Listen to this. The median net worth of white families in America in 2009, I believe, was the data point. The median for whites was $265,000, while black households had only a median net worth of $28,500, roughly 1/10 that of whites. I'm no economist, and we can debate the reasons for that, I'm sure, but I for one, can't make sense of such a reversal when so many others in America have done so well in those 25 years, even after and through a Great Recession. But it also seems safe to say, I think, that Dr. King would not stop there. He would not limit concern only to issues of black and white. As King demonstrated throughout the 1960s, he held broader concerns and went on to address issues of peace and of poverty, among other things. And so in a way, that brings us back to the question, what if? What if Dr. King were to come to Charlotte to speak? What if Dr. King were invited to speak to the Charlotte Rotary Club? What might catch his eye about the city we love? What might provoke his passions? I would hazard a guess about 2 things, among others. First, he would be deeply concerned at the plight of the poor in our city. You may have read, for example, about that recent study that rated Charlotte among the top 50 cities in America as the hardest city for the poor to gain upward mobility, upward traction, pull themselves out of poverty. We like to think of our city as a forward-looking place of equal opportunity, but the data tells us that's not the case for children whose parents are at the bottom of the income ladder. The study measured upward mobility based on factors such as racial segregation, family structures, economic inequality, social capital, and public education. If you add those factors up for Charlotte, we find that our poorest children have just a 4.4% chance of reaching the top quintile of incomes in our city, a 4.4% chance out of 100. We might think of this as an opportunity ceiling. And it seems that that ceiling in Charlotte hangs low and heavy over the heads of our poorest children. I imagine that the second aspect of our city that might catch Dr. King's interest is in our demographics. As many of you probably know, the United States Census Bureau recently announced that Mecklenburg County was one of 6 counties in the nation to become a majority-minority population in 2012. We used to think this point was 3 or 4 years off still, but we crossed that line in 2012. What we used to call minorities individually are now collectively the majority in Charlotte. Non-Hispanic whites are now the minority. Whites are the slowest growing population in Mecklenburg County. From April 2010 to July 2012, the county grew by almost 50,000 people, according to the Census Bureau. Whites accounted for just 15,000 of those numbers. Meanwhile, the black population grew 6%. Latinos or Hispanics, 8.5%. Asians, 12.8%. And those who claim 2 or more races, 11.9%. Our nation as a whole will follow Mecklenburg and the other 11% of all U.S. counties that are majority-minority, but not right away. The United States is currently 37% minority, and it's not expected to be a majority-minority nation until 2050. I wonder if Dr. King might read that data with hope. I wonder if he might say to us something like, Charlotte, the Almighty has lifted you up to a place of influence, a platform where you can shine the light of justice and equality to illuminate the path for your country to follow. As King said 51 years ago today, and he very well might say again, we cannot walk alone, and as we walk, we must make the pledge that we will move forward. He also might say to us that it's not going to be easy or for the faint of heart. We can't cut this up into neatly contained phases of progress and development in our city's social culture. We have to continue to work on the unfinished business of reconciliation and understanding between black and white, while also trying to figure out how to be a city where there is no racial majority. And all the ways that that comes to bear on all aspects of our life, like politics, education, commerce, neighborhood development, and culture. It's akin, it seems to me, to be the same as moving from playing checkers to chess, or maybe more appropriately from playing chess on one level to playing chess on one of those 3-level boards all at the same time. It's not easier for the faint of heart. And Dr. King might well tell us that we must be compelled, what he used to love to say is the fierce urgency of now. We don't have the luxury of time. Nor can we as a community be ruled by our primal natures in 2 specific ways, it seems. First, our inclination to be a tribal people. Let's admit it. That's innately human. We tribe up. We cling to those most like us in almost everything, in housing, in education, in developing other leaders in politics and religion. Second, we must not be ruled by that most primal of all instincts, which is fear. Yet we all see that instinct unmistakably behind some of the most extreme reactions to how we see our country changing. like the protester who stands on the sidewalk in front of my church and spews hate at women and children as they enter the sanctuary to worship. There are some who realize their way of seeing things is on its way out, and they have no more constructive response. I'll be the first to say that all this can seem pretty daunting, pretty intimidating. We may hear all this data and find ourselves wondering, where do we start? What can we do? And here I'll channel two men who have been great influences in my life. The first, as Ellie Clary said, is the leader that both of us worked under at NCMB and Nations Bank and Bank of America, Joe Martin. Many of you will remember that Joe gave a speech in which he called for what came to be known as Race Day, a day of the week when everyone in the city was encouraged to have lunch or coffee with a person of a different race. That was back in the 90s. King would say the fierce urgency of now makes it more important. This became what many of us knew as Friday Friends through Mecklenburg Ministries and other organizations. And if we want Charlotte to be a beacon of the nation, it seems, King might say, we need to make this not just a seasonal or periodic exercise, but a lifelong discipline. And I believe that that's how we'll get there, one by one, relationship by relationship, not in vague, abstract, categorical data, but getting to know people of difference on a personal level. The second mentor of mine is someone I came to know in this, my third career, as a pastor. Jimmy Todd came from an old-line Charlotte family of power and privilege. He did well in a range of businesses, and according to a lot of the stories he used to tell me, he was a bit of a hellraiser when he was younger. But late in life, in those years when you find yourself focusing on what matters most, he found himself fighting to keep his dying church open, and the odds were against him. Thousands of churches closed their doors every week in America. Many electing to close their doors rather than welcome other kinds of people in. One day an opportunity came that no one expected, a chance to open the doors of Jimmy's church and share leadership with a small but widely diverse group of people who were looking to be church together. In his last month, I would talk to Jimmy about that, and he would look back on that day. Those diverse believers arrived, and he said words that have stuck with me and my congregation down deep ever since. He said, there were 50 of them and one of me, and I realized I was the one that better do the changing. At one time in his life, Jimmy Todd would have looked suspiciously on the figure of Dr. Martin Luther King. I'm sure he did. He told me so. But in the end, after he witnessed the rebirth of his church and the change in this city, he came to believe and live out King's words. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. Thanks for the chance to come back and see you.